بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. مرحبا بكم أساتذة الطلاب الأعزاء في درسنا لهذا اليوم عن الشعر الميتافيزيقي في الفصل السابع عشر. نأخذ كنموذج عن هذه المحاضرة الشاعر جامعة. اسمي محمد فرحان، تدريسي كلية التربية الانسانية قسم اللغة الانكليزية. You're welcome, my dear students. Today we're going to lecture on metaphysical poetry 17th century. We take John Donne as a sample poet for our class. We start. First, we're going to give a very brief introduction to metaphysical poetry. Why is it called so? And then, who called it to be metaphysics poets or metaphysical poets, and why did he do so? Metaphysical poetry. We start with some metaphysical notifications. John Donne was regarded as a major poet of the early 17th century, wrote love poems at the beginning of his career, while shifting to religious themes after converting to Catholicism to Anglicanism in the early 1590s. This name was given by Dr. Johnson, but he used this name in order to criticize them, a kind of derision against them, because of the use of very complex words in their own poetry, which is totally different from other traditional schools, like 16th century English poetry. Because of the fantastic form of Donne's poetry is often applied to all minor poems of the Puritan age. We use the term here in a narrow sense, excluding the Fellows of Daniel, or the later group known as the Cavalier poets. The Cavalier is a term that refers to a small group of poets, including Herrick, Lovelace, Suckling, who write songs generally in lighter vein, gay, trivial, but often licentious, but who often cannot together escape the tremendous seriousness of Puritanism. Puritan age is the age that which emphasizing very fanatic religious men at that time. They pay attention to such spiritual purity that man's life should be devoted to religion rather than physical happiness, etc. The metaphysical poetry is so uneven, at times so startling and fantastic, that few critics would care to recommend it to others. Even as modern readers now at time, for example, they pay very less attention to them. They cannot enjoy them easily because of the literary style devices, which is so complex to be understood easily. Again, metaphysical poets through style and literary standards to the winds. They don't care about the rules of classics. For example, song should be like this, start with this, says the octave whatsoever. They are free to write their own style. They broke down all the rules provided by the classic writers and poets. And precisely for this reason, they are forgotten through their great intellect and genius. As we said earlier, they got very less attention, especially in our modern times, because of their own personal rules. Today we're going to pay attention to one of the whole sonnet collections, a poem written by John Donne, which is Death Be Not Proud. Death be not proud, though have some called thee, mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom the things thou dost overthrow do not die, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go. Rest of their bones and souls delivery, thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, at those with poison, war, and sickness dwell. A poppy of charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swallowest thou then? One short sleep pass, we wake eternally, and there shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So looking at this poem, even a subject matter of it seems to be no traditional one. It deals with a subject which is metaphysical, purely metaphysical, beyond nature. Something cannot be talked about, right? Beyond human man or human beings. So before we start with the critical reading of the poem, Death Be Not Proud, we give general ideas after reading Donne's poem, Death Be Not Proud. After carefully reading Death Be Not Proud, I'll have a sense of how the elements work. I take the first step forward for max application. Then we read it more than once, louder, hear the voice. Again we read it more than once, twice, 3 times, so that we can be acquainted with the general meaning of the poem. As we said, it is out of tradition. It is not traditional subject matter that Donne deals with. That's why they were called metaphysical poets by Dr. Johnson. We start with the question, why doesn't the speaker fear death? Why doesn't he fear death? Right now he's challenging death in his poem. Death be not proud. He is asking, commanding it. Why is it so? We will also try to explain the question whether the speaker's argument is convincing or not. Right now, are we satisfied totally that we should not fear death? Death is not fearful? How is that? Did Donne succeed to do so? He was able to convince us, persuade us that we should challenge death, right? We should face death happily, etc. In addition, I'll explain the main literary conventions via which Donne aims at teasing and personifying death to address it as a creature and a slave. Right now, death is not that big, challenging, horrific, panic picture of death. It is no more than a slave, right? So who is afraid of slaves? No one at all. We should challenge it, face it, welcome it once it comes to us. This poem is a sonnet at each of the 3 quatrains, presents a piece of argument that death should not be proud. We have certain devices that Donne depends on. He focuses on in his own addressing to death. The first one I have what's called paradox. The second one that's called irony. Second, third one is personification, etc. Death must not be proud because it is not really all-powerful. It may even be a source of pleasure. When people sometimes die, they get happiness. And we should be happy at this moment. We'll come to it later on. Why is it a source of happiness? Donne uses a paradox. It is one of the very powerful elements that Donne relies on in his own poem in order to challenge death. Presents a very, it's quite tiny picture of death that is just like a slave, and people should not be afraid of it. One of the reasons that poem comes off as such a powerful statement as Donne at first seems to be playful, almost teasing death, but beneath this tone we feel Donne's faith in the immortality of the soul. We get, according to our tradition, to Donne's life. He was a saint, right? He read wide books about Christianity. So he has very deep faith. And because of his very good Christian faithful, right now he's not afraid of death. Because he believes that even after death, we have another life, the immortal life, real life. The poem begins to feel more solemn as it progresses, and that hence the idea of immortality becomes more clearly articulated. There is that his main focus in the poem is about the immortality, life after death, and this is very deep rooted in Christianity, right? Again, Donne uses 2 literary conventions to increase the effect of his poem. He uses the convention of personifying death. He makes the creature, since as long as it's a creature, so his life will be ended soon, right? It will be perished. So he can address it directly. So death is minimized as a picture of creature, just like any other human beings. The second literary convention is the metaphor of death as a kind of sleep. This is one of the puns, right? When we sleep, we get rest. Again, death is no more than just like a longer sleep, for which we are going to awake eternally. These 2 things determine the tone and the progression of the playful to solemn in the poem. Death be not a proud an analysis. Right now we come to analyze the poem line by line in order to understand it fully. From the very first word, addressing death directly, Dan uses the literary conventions of personifying death and comparing it to a sleep to begin an argument that death should not be proud of its might or dreadfulness. But these two elements of his argument come to be seen as a superficial points when the true reason for death's powerlessness becomes clear. A Christian belief in the mortality of the soul is the reason for death's powerlessness, a likeness to sleep. Right? So what is the similarity between sleep and death? It is in terms of period. We sleep 6 hours, 10 hours daily. Then we're going to wake for a new day. Right? When we die, we're going to sleep longer than normal sleep. So in both two cases, we sleep. What is the difference between them? Normal sleep for a short time, death for a long time. Then we are going to wake eternally. So which one is better than the other to be a source of happiness? It is death in reality, because we are going to sleep for a long time. So as a result, consequently, we are going to get a better rest. Then, once we wake, it will be eternal life forever. No more death is there. Then proceeds to say that death is much like sleep. It's picture. Right? So this technique we call in metaphysical poetry, it belongs to them as a privilege used by metaphysics. To state me that death is a slave to other forces. So death has no power by itself. It comes because of the controlling of other powers over it. We'll come to it later on. We have more than one power which is more powerful than death. See, these forces, they could send death to us, they enslave them. But by itself, death is powerless. To state me that death is slave to other forces, and so should not be proud of being the mightiest. Arriving to the couplet which articulates clearly the idea of mortality and gives the final paradox, death, thou shalt die. It's very beautiful imagery, embodied by the paradox that even death itself is going to die. So why is it so proud then? It has no right to be proud at all, because even death itself will die just like us. Dan's faith in the mortality of the soul enables him to prove in this argument that death is truly like its metaphorical presentation of sleep. The use of conventional metaphors. In John Donne, death, be not proud, Donne argues that death is not mighty and dreadful, but is more like metaphorical representation, that is, sleep. Again, we emphasize the difference between sleep and death. It is a matter of period, right? When we sleep for a short time, but when we die, we are going to sleep for a longer time. And is even a source of pleasure and rest. Donne builds his argument on two foundations. One is made up of the metaphors and literary conventions for death that is compared with sleep and is often personified so that it can be addressed directly. First one is going to last for a short time, then even death itself is going to die because it is personified just like any other creature by the poet John Donne. The poem is an address to death that at first seems paradoxical and somewhat playful, but which then rises in all the emotions of faith as it reveals the second foundation of argument, the Christian belief in the immortality of the soul. The poem is an ironic argument that proceeds according to the structure of the sonnet form. Each quatrain contains a new development or aspect of the argument, and the final couplet serves as a conclusion. The first quatrain offers the first paradox and sets up the argument that death has been conventionally personified with wrong attributes, might and dreadfulness. But reality, it is not mighty, it is not dreadful. The poet tells death not to be proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, because he says that death is not so. And this is the main reason that Don tries to convince us as readers, all Christian people in his time and after, that death is not mighty and dreadful. Right? He gives us certain justifications, like paradox, right? Irony, etc. A personification as so. Because he says death is not so, Don will turn this conventional characterization of death on its head with the paradox of the third and fourth lines. He says that people are overthrown by death as if by a conqueror. Die not, poor death, nor you can't do kill me. These lines establish the paradox of death not being able to cause death. Because people in reality, when they die, they just shifted from this life into another eternal life. So death is no more than a gate through which we are going to pass to eternity. The next quatrain will not begin to answer the question of why this paradox is so, but posit another slight paradox, the idea of death as pleasurable. In lines 5 up to 8, Don uses the literary convention of describing death as a metaphorical sleep or rest to construct the argument that death must give pleasure. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from the much more must flow. At this point, the argument seems almost playful, but is carefully hinting at the solemnity of the deeper foundation of the belief in immortality. The last line comes closer to announcing the true reason for death's powerlessness and pleasure. It is why, to the soul's delivery, because as we come to our bodies, the structure of the body, our lifeless, for example, we see that the soul is imprisoned within the body. So once death comes, it's going to redeem the soul out of her prison, that the prison of the body, right? It is the way to the soul's delivery from the body and life on earth, implicitly into another better realm. That is, life after death. In heaven, it should be. A new reason for death's powerlessness arises in the next 4 lines. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and those with poison, war, sickness dwell, and popular charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke, why swallowest thou then? So we have different pictures that gives us the same that death gives us. It is rest. Don argues here that there are forces more powerful than death, and that actually control it. So death has no freedom by itself. It doesn't come by its own will. Rather, it is sent by some other forces. That's why it is a slave, right? Fate and chance determine when death occurs. Unless there is fate, unless there is chance, death will never occur. It will never happen. And to whom it comes, again, death cannot decide by itself that this will die. Right? Unless it's sent by some other forces to which person it should go. Kings, for example, with the powers of law and war, can summon death and throw it on whom they wish. Again, kings, for example, they have authority and power. They can decide to kill someone, for example. So unless kings by themselves decide whom should be killed and die, death will never happen. A desperate men, murderers, suicides, can also summon death with the strength of their emotions. It's our own will, our own decision that I'm going to die. Death has no power at all. In lines 11 up to 12, Don again uses the metaphor of death as better sleep, or it is a kind of sleep, but says that drugs or charms give one a better sleep than death. And he asks playfully why death should be so proud, after all these illustrations of its weakness have been given. Why swellest thou then? Finally, with the last couplet, Donne reveals the true deeper reason behind his argument that death should not be proud of its power. These lines also offer our explanation of the metaphor for death of sleep or rest. One short sleep past, we wake eternally. So true life is not this life, because we're going to die and then get into a better, eternal, happier life than this we are actually living in. And there shall be no more, that thou shalt die. It's a very powerful paradox that summarizes all the introduction in the poem. That is, death should not be proud. The most powerful reason that death should not be proud of itself is that even death itself is going to die one day, right? According to Christian theology and belief in the Christian heaven, where the soul is immortal, death will no longer exist. And so this last paradox, death thou shalt die, becomes true. To conclude, Donne's belief in the immortality of the soul enables him to prove in his argument that death is in actuality like its metaphorical representation. It is just like another picture of sleep. So again, if it's the same idea, what's the difference between normal sleep and death? It is just by name, right? But to come to what's come later on, it is the rest. Again, there is a very slight difference between the two. When we die, we sleep for a long time, then we wake eternally. And when we sleep, we are going to die again for a short time, after which we are going to wake up again. So sleep, it is another picture for death. His faith allows him to derive a source for this conventional metaphor and to improve the metaphor of death as all-powerful conqueror. But in reality, it is not so at all. It is just like a slave. His Christian beliefs also allow him to state his truth in paradoxes, the mysteries which are justified by the mystery of faith. So if I have another look at the poem, I try to shed light on the most beautiful imageries used by the poet, Donne. So death be not proud, though have some called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. He gives a direct judgment depending on his own belief in Christianity, that death is not fearful at all, unless as long as we believe in God, right? Because we know earlier that this short life will pass, and death is no more than just like a gate through which we are going to pass into an eternal life. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. So there is a much pleasure which can be derived from death itself, right? As long as we are going to sleep for a long time, our bodies will get rest, right? Will be more comfortable, even more than our normal sleep, daily sleep, right? And after death, what will come later on? It is the eternal life in heaven, right? Rest of their bones. Every day you're going to get some tiredness, whatsoever, suffering because of the daily activities, etc., works, so on. So when we sleep, our bodies rest, right? Will be much more comfortable. So we can imagine if we sleep for a long time, what kind of rest we're going to get from? It is fully comfort, right? There is no any pain in our body. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. If we take death by itself, deprive it as a death no more. So it is nothing. It has no power that can take action by its own decision. Rather, it is controlled, sent by some other forces that control on it. Right? So death, as death, has no power by itself. It is controlled by some other powers, right? Elements, etc. One of them is fate. Again, we believe that Christian, because John Donne is a Christian, very too much believes in Christianity. He believes that unless there is fate, death will never come to us. So why should we be afraid of it? We should not. Again, desperate men, chance, kings, etc. All these causes can bring death. But again, death by itself is nothing at all. It is sent by some other forces. That's why John Donne says, thou art slave, why swellest within? Why shalt sleep pass, wake eternally, and there shall be no more death, thou shalt die. What is the end of death itself? It is death itself. Even death will die one day. So, to conclude, it has no right at all to be proud of its own power and might. Right? So this is all about our class today concerning metaphysical poetry. I will take John Donne, Death Be Not Proud, as a sample for our own study. Hopefully we'll get some.
Yes.
Make use of this explanation and meet you next class, hopefully. Thank you for your attention.